rules.
60.
Yeah.
Because we had
That's
a
like living.
broken, well, Judge that broke.
All right,
switched.
good morning. We are live. It's a Beach Preservation Ad Hoc Committee meeting, 9 a.m. Friday, April 19th. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that the press and public have been duly notified of the meeting in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. So today, committee wanted to kind of take a break from presentations and information overload and just recap kind of where we've been and talk about next steps and documents that may eventually get to City Council. So just by way of quick review, because I know everybody hasn't been here for every meeting and some residents that may be watching haven't followed the whole flow. So we started early February, set out the objectives and goals for this group. Talked a little bit about Douglas, I think, gave us a tutorial on the current OCRM lines and just kind of got a level set. Next meeting, we talked about the Beach Preservation Fund and the funding levels and kind of where we are and the flow of that for a year. Then we shifted gears and had Matt Slagle here from the OCRM just to hear from the regulatory side of the house. And Stephen Trainum has been at most of these meetings with us. And then we had Dare County, North Carolina. We listened to their protocol and actions that they had taken up in Outer Banks. And we also took a break and just had a group meeting and just talked, kind of debriefed after all of those sessions and talked about next steps. And as a result of that meeting, we had Stephen and Nicole Elko, who represent Sullivan's Island from a coastal engineering standpoint. I had a conversation with them about what Sullivan's Island had done. Next meeting, we wound up having the mayor of Sullivan's Island and city town administrator, Andy Binky. Then we had Army Corps last week. Listening to what would it look like to be a federally managed beach program. So Desiree Douglas and I had spent some time just really high level looking at kind of what are the main strategic buckets we need to touch on and getting something back to council at some point. And that was included in your packet. And just at a really high level, there were 6 items. Define the ideal beach profile. I think we're still waiting on a little bit of work from Stephen Trainum for that. Evaluate beach preservation strategies. Evaluate locally managed and funded versus federally managed and funded. Establish an emergency protection policy. Identify funding needs, and then any zoning changes that may happen. So just at its highest level, is there anything else that is top of mind for y'all that we need to be sure we're putting into a bucket to get back to council? Scott?
Can I just ask you to maybe review, these seem like a pretty comprehensive list, just to remind the public and us what were our 3 main objectives and kind of guiding things that we were trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I can. Happen to have that right in front of me, so thank you very much. Good prompt. So develop recommendations for a more proactive response to beach erosion, and develop recommendations for new, consistent, and sustainable funding mechanisms to fund future needs and projects.
That helps. These all kind of segue into most of
I
those.
think,
Yeah.
but again, don't want to, we kind of did this in a vacuum a little bit, so I want to make sure we don't miss anything from a big strategy piece that, again, may be on y'all's minds that we just overlooked somewhere. So anything else that we need to think about from and I don't know what it is going to look like when we come out with something at the end to get to council, but when this was done in 2002, 4.
7? I think the report was 7.
I mean, it was a hefty consultant, 100-page document. I don't think we need something like that, but would be nice to have. I mean, those 3 items are all recommendations, so we got to have something that's tangible and actionable to get back to council at some point. So, no other big items.
Well, just in response to what you said, I would be a fan of not putting off the table hiring someone to put together a 100-page plan that's 30, a large plan, because I think that the more professional plan covering a number of the items we've talked about is the sort of thing that will raise money. So it's an investment in the funding sources to be able to educate the individuals and others that would be affected by any suggestions we make.
And it could be that an update is not as costly as a as the initial lift for us. I mean, that might not be interested to at least, ping the person that, or the entity that helped us before and see if they've, if they could dust it off and see what that would entail, really.
I think the heavy lift of that plan was this type of, having a consultant do this type of process. If this is done and can kind of inform a consultant, all this work has already been done, might be that they could take this
Cobble
work
something
and kind of
together, yeah.
Package it.
update it, package it.
Yeah, because I think a lot of these items were touched on. The Army Corps, looking at a federally managed program was not touched on during that cycle. So it might be easy enough to do exactly that, kind of dust off what's been done and update it with where we've been. And, the beach profile is a little bit different twist than what was done before too. So, and I know there's been, Dan, you and I had a quick conversation one day. Some of the folks that were involved the first time, are certainly still around. It might be interesting to have them come in and have a little bit of conversation with some of those folks that have been on this path too, if we feel the need. But
So, and just to ask Cindy's, I think that's a good idea. That kind of goes to that whole first objective about the policies, procedures, and it is the plan that we're trying to develop that's a written plan that everybody can be, hitch their guidepost to and go forward. And I think the more professional it might help us with the assessments or anything else we do.
Right, and my guess is that there's as we know, there's companies out there who this is a template for them, and it's filling in what our beach looks like, where it needs to look like, and then there may be iterations of it as to, is it the perfect beach? Is it close to, like what we're aiming at? But I just feel like this is going to be an important step, and I think that to do that, we probably need to identify a couple of companies who do it and get from them via a phone call or an email, but finding out what the costs generally are for such a program, and if there's a la carte, like, there's the $3 million and there's the $50,000, what is that? And I think that would be really informative, but I do think we need something professionally put together so that we can go and ask for funding, or whether it's from members of the island, or whether it's a larger, like the state or otherwise. That's all.
unless you're the Army Corps and it's $3 million regardless of who you are.
And I wonder, when we make that call, or when we engage that consultant, we're going to have some answers for them out of this committee about the path. Are we going to, is the federal fund going to be a part of it? Are we going to have a tax district or not? Are we, I think there's some elements to this. What do we deem an emergency? If the state's at 20 feet, are we going to decide that we would prefer it to be 50? And what's our profile? I mean, we need some answers, I think, before we can start that process.
Well,
Maybe we don't, but it
Wasn't-
seems to me that we need some
Wasn't CSE
defined.
gonna prepare us a ideal beach document
Profile.
Yeah.
profile?
Yeah, that was number one
They
on your
have,
list.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So we so that,
That's a big
They're not quite finished, though, I don't believe.
Correct.
In the Army Corps, as I understand it, they said even if we were to engage them, if the city were to decide that's the path to go, it's years and years and years down the road before that happens. So it seems to make sense to do the profile regardless of it, while we're continuing to study it, because I don't know how the city can move forward without knowing what they want to accomplish. And I think the sooner we do it, the better. Because I'm guessing it could be 27, 28, 29 before the Army Corps would ever actually do anything.
at best.
And that could be longer or extended, so we can't really bank on it at this point.
but we can move parallel, even if we do get
Yeah.
the Army Corps involved, we can still, if they say that we, 20 feet, or, they say they're every 5 years, my understanding was if we decide that we would like to do something in the interim, we can do it on our dime. So I feel like those are parallel paths. I don't think they're one or the other, is the way I've been looking at it.
I agree.
And I mean, I keep going back to the easements, and I feel like that's gonna.
It's a
Elephant in the
showstopper.
It's a
room.
problem.
It'll be a showstopper, potentially.
Could
Maybe.
be,
So
could be.
I would think these companies who do this would be able to give us like even it's free to get for them to pitch to us.
You would hope.
And then they would basically tell us how long this would take, what information they would need, And that may, if nothing else, move us forward. But I do think this is a sooner than later to at least get that information.
Well, I was looking at the outline. I did a little research on pretty much every aspect of it. And I've got an article here that says, beach width provides the greatest protection against flooding, erosion during long storms. That's a good read. And then it has the monitoring programs that they have. And they have different stages when the condition of the beach, which triggers action. And so this is a really good plan. This came from Florida's erosion control plan. And then with the best management practice, keeping going down the line, Ms. Nicole Elko wrote this. And just saying, she outlines everything that she thinks is good for renourishment of the beach. And renourishment from the inlet waterway and managing that, taking that sand, putting it on the beach and kind of doing it again, 5 years, 4 years down the road. And it lists all the pros and cons of all the different options that they have for that. And then with the terminal growings, the jury's out on those. They work, but they're really expensive. And then they have to go hand in hand with renourishment. So I don't think really that's, you can read it for yourself, but I don't think that's an option. And then there's another one I found that it's local funding for coastal projects, and it's a consideration of what you should look for before you even ask for funding. The demographics of the area, who do the residents think is responsible for providing the money for the beach? And that's a good read as well. So if you read all these together, it kind of puts together a plan for us that we can kind of tweak and make it our own. But there's a lot of good opinions out there, so it's not a one case fits all kind of thing. We have to kind of cater it or customize it to our needs. But the biggest thing is finding money, because without money, none of this can be done. So it's either from a special tax district or accommodations tax or combination or some other kind of funding that we can put together and have everybody on board. Just like the man from Dare County said, that was a tough sell. It's trying to get everybody to get involved and pony up a little bit for the beach. And then it's a PR move. We've got to, if we want to have that independence of funding our own beach renourishment, we've got to come up with funding. And I think that's the number one goal for all this. And then because the beach contributes so much to the state economy, it's $16 billion. So it's a lot of money out there that we need to, if we could, tap into, along with our own local sourcing.
So we're different than North Carolina so much as we're not relying on all the residents to contribute. We have it generated differently. To me, I think we keep circling back around to the same thing, which was we need to have a plan. We need to figure out what we want to do. We need to figure out what it's going to cost to do it. We need to take the money that we need to figure out how much money we're reasonably going to raise on a yearly basis based on the protocol we have now, which is what the city raises and what Wild Dunes contributes. We got to figure out if it's going to be a 5-year plan, which I think probably is a number to look at. And then we got to figure out how much of a shortfall we have. Once we get the shortfall, then we got to figure out how we're going to raise the difference. And I don't know how we can really proceed with making a plan and coming up with an idea until we figure out those things. And that's just kind of a big picture. I know there's a lot more minutia tied up in it. But I think the sooner we get that plan, in order to run those calculations, the better, because from the perspective I've seen from the state withdrawing the funds they have and the feds only coming in if there's a named storm or if there's significant damage, I think we have to kind of presume, worst case scenario, that we're on our own and then figure out how to do it. And once we know what the shortfall is, we can figure out, is it some kind of contribution from the citizens, or can we make it up with a small amount of an increase in some type of taxes? I don't want to put a toll on the bridge, but I think there's things we can do, because I don't think it's going to be that much of a shortfall based on the revenue we're generating now, coupled with the Wild Dunes money.
And we may find it's like not going to the dentist for too many years. We're going to have a bigger upfront expense, and maybe we have to take out some sort of loan or otherwise to get through what maybe, let's say, let's say the plan came out and said if we put in, and I'm not an expert, but let's say we had to put in a groin, and it's expensive, or we need to dredge, and it's expensive. The idea is that may be one of those things that costs a lot on the front end, but as we look at a maintenance plan over 25 years, it more than helps keep the price down over a longer term. So I think we've got some unknowns here. But that even with the tax, we still may have to ask for some, get a bond or something short,
Well, you're right, because one of the problems we.
or leverage what we have now as we do the PR to hopefully encourage others to.
Yeah, and with the plan, we're not waiting till the last minute when it's dire, because I think that's just the way it seemed to have worked out. Because when it's dire, we spend more money. And that goes back to the example in North Carolina where they saved $13 million by planning ahead.
Well, so I think what I'm hearing, we're kind of back to where we were when we started, that without the ideal beach plan and it getting kind of coalescing as to what the agreement is of what that looks like, we can't really price it. And if we can't price it, we don't know what our funding level is. And so, maybe the long pole is for Steve to come and we solidify that number one item on your list, Philip. And, but in the meantime, I think it might be helpful to kind of coalesce. We've had a lot of information about funding opportunities. Maybe we solidify that list of where our options are going to be to fund this, whether it's taxes, whether it's the Army Corps, whether it's the state. I think the state's, that's kind of dried up and there might be a couple bucks there, but, that's something that was relied upon historically that may not be there any longer. But, I'm just kind of tossing that out as an idea.
Well, and we haven't, it's been on my whiteboard for quite some time. We haven't tapped the county very hard either in conversations yet, and I don't know that there's much there. Dan, you talk about a small tax increase, or some, whatever. These are big numbers. To me, I don't think the math's that hard to figure out. We're taking in $1.9 million roughly a year in our beach preservation fund. I think once we have the piece from Stephen Trainum, I think it's going to be very easy to put together what's needed and the funding and the timing and the routine and the maintenance and what that looks like. So maybe that's really our next meeting, I don't know if Stephen can be ready, to get agreement on that, because that does drive everything as you look at monies and timing and everything else, so.
You got, Wild Dunes has, what, $7.5 million they're ready to contribute, and the city has 9, 8.5.
Ready to contribute is, I think, a strong term, but yeah,
Oh,
they got it.
that was my understanding, is that they're ready to turn it over when the city wants it. So if we got 15 now, we're getting pretty close to it.
But something I keep thinking about, keeps percolating as we talk about this is, we have a section of our beach that is publicly accessible and open to all funding mechanisms. And we have a portion of our beach that is publicly inaccessible and prohibited from state, federal funding. And I think that one of the first steps we need to do perhaps is segregate those in a way, because I'm not certain we end up coming out of this with one plan. We might have one plan that's an A and section A and section B, because I'm not certain that what Wild Dunes needs is going to be what the rest of the beach needs going forward. Because, we're in a cycle on the south end that we haven't seen in 40 or 50 years. And we might get through this in the next 2 months and not see it again for another 40 or 50 years. And a 5-year goal is great in funding, and we may never need it, and it would be fabulous if it's there and we don't. But, we do have two very distinct, we're not all the same. And somehow I think in our plan and as we're moving forward, we need to think about, because the money that Wild Dunes has and is ready to contribute is for Wild Dunes infrastructure on their beach, which I assume, I don't think they're just
Well, I
going to
think
give
it's
it to
because-
us for
I
the
think it's
south end.
Because they recognize the beach access issue.
Yeah,
But at the same time, the tax that was incremental was for the island as a whole, and I view it as one island, not separate.
right.
But I think that's why they're making up the difference with it. That's my understanding.
With the money drying up or the costs becoming, escalating at a rapid pace, I would like to know, what would it take to qualify Wild Dunes for a public beach? Is it 50 public spots that might be reserved and paid for? Is it 100? And I'm wondering if we shouldn't maybe, have that conversation, at least know what that requirement would be, where Wild Dunes, what is the minimum requirement for Wild Dunes to be considered a public beach? And is it something that we might be surprised at what that is? And might be a conversation that we are able to have with Wild Dunes to find out some way to get them qualified so that could open up another avenue for federal funding and state funding.
Well, 2017-18, they said the entire 7 miles of Isle Palm Beach is public, according to state guidelines. And complete access exists from Breach Inlet to 1/4 mile east of the public beach access 57. So they were included in that federal funding, or that money, public funding, in 2017, 2018.
Yeah, only to the other side of the, yeah.
Yeah, there's 3 miles of beach there. Yeah. 3 miles.
So 2.5 miles from that point on is to Dewey's up to
Yeah.
where it turns.
It's not
I don't know
eligible.
if there's a way to look at it further. One of my concerns with the Corps is that if they're paying, or if the island's paying 35%, are we really ahead of the game based on their comment last week when Desiree asked a wonderful question, which was, isn't it true that the expenses are going to be more? And they said yes. And I don't know how we
Well,
can.
she said maybe. She said it could be. I mean, I can't imagine that 35% of a federal project would be more than, I mean,
So our experience,
Yeah,
what I
I mean, that's-
recall, when we did our last project in 2018, it was a $15 million project. And I recall, I can't remember exactly what beach project they were working on, but a very similar scope project was 35 million compared to the
Army Corps.
Yeah, the Army Corps.
so that's roughly 50, not 35. I mean, it's still, I don't think we'd be coming out, I don't think we'd be paying more. And in addition, you do get the insurance that if
Had a storm.
it all
Yeah.
goes away the week after it gets put down, because, I mean, let's face it, like, the work we're doing down here someday soon, I mean, if we have a Hugo this summer, it's gone. I mean, those are facts.
Well, not
they
necessarily,
would
'cause
come in if the-
Hurricane Sandy, after they, New Jersey replenished their beach, the parts that they replenished had enough beach dry sand when the storm came in, acted as a buffer. So.
I mean, I understand that it acts as a buffer, but
They
I mean,
kept their beach.
first of all, Hurricane Sandy was nowhere near a Hurricane Hugo. It was a Category 1, I believe, when it hit. It was a lot of flooding for New York, and they're not used to hurricanes, but. I mean, but my thinking, my biggest takeaway from the Corps was, if that happens, I mean, that's a 50-year storm, is what that's categorized as, then they come back and they fix it free of cost. That's, to me,
That's
that's
subject to
worth.
availability of funds, too.
From Congress.
Yeah.
And we'd have federal
So they-
protection anyhow if there was a big storm, separate from the Army Corps.
But they wouldn't come and they wouldn't come and,
Yeah, that wouldn't trigger an automatic renourishment.
Bring it back to where it was. I
Right.
agree.
Yeah,
To
it
your
really
point, Katie,
depends
that-
on the category, the extent of the damage, and what FEMA ultimately authorizes at the time of that incident. For example, the last storm, we were able to prove that we lost some sand, but they didn't authorize any funds related to beach renourishment other than emergency protective measures. So we're limited in what FEMA could approve or
Yeah,
not.
but- And I
Yeah.
think Katie's point, though, is that if that happened, and we wouldn't be able to react, we wouldn't have the funds, it's a massive insurance policy, I think is
Yes.
where you're going, yeah.
I mean, that's how I
like
look at
that
it.
idea.
I mean, it goes back to what you're saying, run it in parallel. To what you're saying as far as like the plan, the comprehensive plan, Elizabeth. I mean, when Stephen comes back with us and talks about the evaluation of the beach, and what does an ideal beach look like, and where's our sand, where are we accreting, where are we losing sand, I think we'll have the answers to how we're going to develop our strategy of funding and zoning. Because one of the previous maps he'd broken it down into 7 zones. So, because like you said, each
Yeah.
part of the beach is different. So that will drive that strategy. Where's your biggest Band-Aid? What's your first problem child? What's your second? What's your third? What's your fourth? Right? We're gonna set a pecking order, and that will then drive the funding and how we do it. So I think there will be a comprehensive plan. We will look at the beach as zones versus as separate sections but it will be one comprehensive plan. I think that's it's already built into the way it's been evaluated by the engineers.
Does it make sense to start identifying several different contractors who could bid it out? In other words, if we wanted to get an idea in order to figure out what the cost is going to be once we finally have the plan, maybe we can start identifying alternative people to bid it out to in order to see what the differences are. And to see if there's things that'll trigger discounts. For example, if we lock into 2 consecutive plans as opposed to just one, can we start saving funds?
Desiree, can you, or Philip, somebody for Wild Dunes, I know that the city holds the permit for that, but should we have a representative from, I mean, it feels to me like, I know that, that's a private beach. It's public, but it's publicly inaccessible or whatever. And, I'm not sure how they determined, if they turned over this decision to the city about when we renourish Wild Dunes, or are they actively involved in that calendaring and saying, hey, we've got, we're starting to develop an issue back here, we're going to need y'all to update your permit, are they driving that, or are we driving that? Because I feel like we might be missing somebody here at the table.
Certainly, I think that's a good point. If we're going to be talking about the strategy or the policy associated with the Wild Dunes Beach, which is different, has had a need for nourishment, compared to the entirety of the island. But that is a parallel track. We work really close with the Wild Dunes Community Association, and there has been a history, right, with that beach from the first project, the second project. So we have a really good idea of how those projects work, how long they last, and what the hotspots are. So there's already a sort of a plan embedded in how frequent that project needs to happen, and that's why you look at the 2018 project, the previous one, it's been in 10-year cycles. So anticipating the need for a project in 2028, 2027, we engaged CSC last year to start the permitting process for what that offshore project would look like, in addition to the shore management project. So I think because we've done it and we've had a history with Wild Dunes, we have a pretty solid plan of how often we know what the hotspots are. We know what the short-term opportunities are. That's why we're pursuing the shore management project. We know how much they cost, and that's to me a good model to look at for other parts of the island as well.
I think to Elizabeth's question, which is a good one. I think my view is community association is deferring to the city to drive the bus and monitor, and CSE's, looking at the whole 7-mile stretch, so.
And what I understand in 2008, the first time they were pursuing and working towards a project, they had hired the coastal engineer and the consultant, and the city made a decision at that time to take control of the permitting process and pursue the permitting, I think because of ease, that believe that it would be easier. And since that time, it's been the city driving the permitting process.
Good.
They're definitely planning the finances. That part of it is embedded in their operations, that we're kind of driving the project, but they're saving, and they kind of know the ultimate dollar goal with anticipating once the project starts, they kind of
They're gonna
have
push
that
that pot of
80
money,
or
yeah.
85% of the project cost ready to contribute.
Good, yeah.
And again, I think that when whoever we employ, which I'm hoping we do, to do a plan, that they will then, absolutely, that is a great point, that they would get Wild Dunes input as they put the plan together, looking for the particular issues they have. But going back to what Katie had brought up, have we, with the Army Corps, we don't need to make a decision, but they did mention a letter of intent what did we decide last week? Were we going to provide it so that we at least, and did we? I guess that's the.
So we heard that their deadline was November of this year, of when the city should provide a letter of, hey, we're interested, would like for you to consider us. So we did get that information, but we haven't, the group didn't really reach a decision on, other than, yes, it sounds like there's no downside in submitting it and presenting that to the Corps. But other than that, there's been no discussion.
It
thought we
sounded like
decided
we
that
just
we
put it
were-
in the queue, sorry.
I thought we decided that we were going to do it and that we didn't need to go to council to necessarily throw that letter of intent out. That was my walk away from it.
Yeah, because
last
there's not a commitment
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's just-
that was
financially
my
at all,
understanding.
but
So
I think
maybe
we
we
were
should
just
just
waiting on the timing.
Confirm
yeah.
that that's what we want to do.
Yeah.
Send it.
Yep.
Yeah,
Get
and
it on.
I think from the Army Corps standpoint, I think it'd be beneficial to have somebody from Foley here to have a conversation, because, I mean, you had to listen, to me, you had to listen pretty closely with the Army Corps to hear what was not being said to some extent. I mean, they're just now doing Foley renourishment for a storm that was 2 years ago. So, with Army Corps, what we're living with right now, I mean, it's completely out of your control. Timing and what and when and everything is completely out of your control.
But.
Not a bad thing.
But to that point, let's say that after Adelia, we had decided the day after, oh, we need a beach
Need to
renourishment.
do something.
Timing, when would we be starting?
Well, if there was no permit in place, probably 2 or 3 years later.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the reality that we're living in.
Yeah, I get
And
that.
And that's why, and I
Well,
mean,
isn't that
that's
why we're
why
here,
this, that's
to
why we're all
streamline that
here. I mean, in
process?
my opinion, that's why we're all here right now, so that we can have some sort of, something automatic in place so that we aren't sitting here being like, oh, shoot, now we have to wait 3 years. Like, that's what I think. If we looked back on these little meetings 5-10 years from now to say whether we were successful or not, I feel like that would be the biggest thing, is that we could say, oh, we have a policy in place that we don't get into that crisis situation, or we get into a crisis situation and we can fix it in, let's say, 6 months. I mean, to me, that would be success compared to where we are today.
You want
Well,
to
and I
define a
think that
trigger.
goes-
You want
yeah,
a-
yeah,
you
that-
want different trigger points
Correct.
to create.
And then a
Trigger, this is
quicker-
a predefined
An actual
reaction.
trigger, not a slow
No,
turtle.
no, no. But they said that we funded and we planned, and that we've had that plan in place. The funding mechanism is there, whether it's a full pot of money or a going forward pot of money as we execute the reaction to whatever event occurred. Now, we can't define every event. That's going to be impossible to do.
Right.
But we can give general guidelines as to what erosion level we're willing to accept. And that's why the healthy beach profile, that aspect of it is, like you said so many times, is absolutely critical to the whole puzzle that we're here. That's the first piece that has to be laid down to put all these other parts around it.
Correct. I think
Right?
the strategy and the funding are stem from this definition of the ideal beach profile. What are the triggers? How often do we anticipate the triggers to happen? Is it a 5-year, 7-year, 10-year process? But I think in that breakdown that the mayor talked about before, there are some other pieces that are not necessarily tied to the funding or to the strategy
Okay.
that I don't think this committee has really talked through. And I would like to encourage the group to think about, the building zoning policy changes. Are there things that we need to be thinking about from a building perspective and resiliency perspective that could supplement this plan for beach preservation and beach nourishment? And identify who do we want to hear from, what are some of the questions that we want to answer, because that'll be part of the plan and part of the policy recommendations that this group could take back to council. Some of the things that we've talked about internally is this policy that allows pools being built past the maximum building line. Does that make sense? Is that something that should be reviewed? What should be the city's policy generally on our hard erosion control structures? We've talked about that at the council level, but that's another topic that I think is worth of discussion. And the establish an emergency protection policy. Obviously, our goal would be to have a proactive maintenance, consistent maintenance plan that we avoid getting into emergency situations, because as you said, we can't anticipate it all. So when we do, what is going to be the city's policy, the city's position on it, that we can communicate with the community, and everybody understands what's going to happen. And we don't have that, and I think that that's been part of the challenge of our response during this particular emergency situation down at Breach Inlet.
Yeah, that was one of the interesting things, or through the discussion with Dare County and then the discussion with Sullivan's, that what I heard was, they have, well, Sullivan's doesn't really need to have a plan, but particularly Dare County, they have a plan. But when something happens, to Andrew's point, you can't tell when a storm's coming or things, when something critical happens, both Sullivan's and Dare County kind of defer to the private citizens to effectively fund and hold the line themselves until they can get there, which is not ideal, but I think it's something that needs to be on the table. I mean, we need to think about that as an element, and whether that's a tax district or it's just an individual that they themselves are impacted, and maybe that's their decision point about how, if they, it's something that I think needs to be on the table.
One thing that Dare said that I was impressed with was they said that they're able to advertise now, they always have a perfect beach, because they take care of it, they have a plan. And I think a lot of the issues that you've raised, not all, but a lot of the issues will be resolved if we have a plan. For example, the reason the pools are a concern is because you got to deal with them when you have huge erosion. The huge erosion becomes because we don't have a plan. And it takes longer. If we have plenty of beach and plenty of width, that's not going to be an issue anymore. Even these, even if there were beach barriers that were out there that are covered in sand, you're not going to see them anymore. The walking path won't be bothered anymore because you have a lot of beach. So if we have an adequate plan, none of that's going to be an issue. And that's my thought, and I
Yeah,
think
but
that's one
Dan,
of the reasons why we need it.
don't forget what Dare County said. There are times where they have issues, they don't have funding, so you wait. I mean, I get all the proactivity and I get the plan and fully behind it, but there are going to be situations where we're going to have erosion and there are going to be issues. It doesn't matter how much we plan.
Well, Dare County has houses that are falling into
Yeah,
the ocean
exactly.
currently,
So, I
so
mean,
I don't.
what we put on a
Some-
piece of paper is going to be great, and what we adopt as policies is going to be far, far beyond where we sit today, for sure. But, I mean, it's just such a chicken and the egg thing. I mean, you got the funding, you got the plan, you got a contractor that's available, you got a dredge that's available. I mean, it's putting a 100-page document together is not going to proactively
There's-
fix everything on
But
our
there's other
beach.
pieces. For example, one of the comments the other week was it would be nice if we had these patches we could put on that we don't do. So now it's either a plan or there's no plan, is what we've been working with. But one of the, I forget who it was 2 weeks ago, said it would be nice if we had this set up so we can actually do interim repairs to areas that have problems. It wouldn't alleviate all problems, but I think it would help significantly.
I don't even know what that means.
Well, Florida has it where.
Shoal management.
they,
Shoal management. But again, you're still in a
different
permitting
conditions
process.
That
You're-
trigger it.
Yeah.
And if you have a minor beach erosion, then that triggers that plan to go into effect.
Yeah.
And it goes down the line. But they have people in place after a storm who go out there and assess it, and they take pictures of it, and they submit, this is the hot spot, this is where
Yeah.
it needs to go, this is what we have to do, and they move on it. They protect their beaches. But you're right, I think Cindy has it right on the head, is we've got to build it up first, and then we can maintain it.
How long, go ahead.
I would just say, and again, I feel like a broken record, and I apologize, but it answers so many questions. If we can have somebody explain what a plan would contain, that'll also open the door for what it doesn't. And I think then we can look at, zoning and all, but I think that, again, I think until we see what kind of plan we would be looking at, it's kind of hard to jump forward. Plus, you do run into things, the golden goose. So if we are using 1% of and I don't have rental property, so I just want to clear this, I do not have rental property. But if we're looking at these sorts of accommodation taxes, and then we're saying, well, you can have a house that you rent for X that creates this, but you can't have a pool any longer, that's going to reduce what they, you got it, just like property values are going to stay up if you can go to Sullivan's and build a pool, but you can't we just have to, there's so much where that gets entangled. And it's great, hard questions. I just feel like we need to get a plan for the beach, because the other things, then we'll know if these consultants can say, well, we can't answer, or we have found, then I think while they're working on the plan is when we should start digging into some of this. But I feel strongly we need to get someone in the room who can tell us what a plan would entail, the process, the timing, the amount of money, what choices we have, where the information comes from, and move that forward. And then once we make that decision, then we come back to the zoning while they do that plan. But I'm just concerned, that's really important stuff too. And I think that I hadn't even thought of, it's brilliant. But what's brilliant, the answers are going to be complicated. And I'm just afraid we'll get into the trees when we really need to get the beach moving forward. And clearly, even like you're talking permitting, even if we get this plan to execute it, it's going to take time, even if we had all the money in the world. So there's a lot of steps. But I think, again, I'm broken record, sorry. It's just going around and around. Let's get someone in the room who can educate
No, I
us
think-
on
I'm
how
on your
plans
same
work.
loop here, because, there's a picture here of what the beach looked like with the critical lines and the setback. And there's plenty of beach down towards the breach inlet, and most people are behind the setback on where their pools are and everything. And if you build the beach back up and maybe get it a little bit better, then none of this will, like you were saying, this won't be an issue anymore. The seawalls will be buried, and the only time you'll see it is when there's a huge storm. And then we're all in trouble. Wish we had one. So I think we do need to build the beach back up first.
And we do have some urgency.
Yeah.
Look at Breach Inlet right now.
What's the timeline for a plan? Or to meet with Steve? I thought he said it was gonna be quicker, but I don't know.
So I think where Stephen left it is he came to you all and said, and it was 450 cubic yards per foot in front of your house. He kind of explained, this is pie in the sky, money is no issue. That would be perfect. You'd have way more than enough sand than you ever need. I think the problem with that is to maintain that, you have to, we'd have to be doing massive renourishments every few years. And the cost of doing that, so I think he's telling us, you might have to scale back to get to a more realistic, what you can kind of tolerate level, and then you build out. So it's that cadence and the cost of the projects that really drives kind
Or
of
do we
what you
go
can afford
backwards?
to have.
Do we price out the best case scenario and then reel it back? I think I'd rather do that.
I think what I,
That's what that is what he specified at that time. He was said the 450 cubic yards per linear foot of beachfront, and then it was like maybe realistically, what could be done and manageable for budget was like 350 cubic yards per linear foot of beachfront. And so when you look at that, then you're right, it impacts where pools and things like that where should be. But I think what was loose and why we want to look at it as a comprehensive policy, we're evaluating all these different risks. And those structures are risk, and they were put beyond what was defined as a max build line. So it's like looking at all these things, they'll have to be looked at the same time. They can't be looked at, hey, we got this and then this. All risks have to be evaluated equally and then put and hammered through on the table. So it's one plan at one time. Otherwise, you end up with, hey, we made a plan, now we're chopping at the plan, and then we're ending up with something that might be mismatched. It may not work.
No, and I didn't speak clearly. All that I'm saying is we need to get like our 100-page plan or 50-page plan moving forward while we look. I just don't want to get entangled in the next 3 meetings with what do we do about zoning. I think we need to get someone in here so that we can figure out how we hire someone, get that done. And at the same, while that's going forward, I'm not saying one is more or less important.
Okay.
well, and in parallel,
But
now.
those pools that are here, that are legal, aren't going to be here if we don't get this, we
Right.
don't have a plan and some
And
funding.
don't we have, with what Steve presented, and I mean, it's kind of a math equation, I think, to Philip's point, if we've got the ideal beach profile from what he presented up there, and he was going to do some surveys to give us the where are we now, I mean, it's really just the difference between the surveys that he's going to provide versus the ideal beach. Then if we want to reel back 100 feet or 50 feet or whatever, that's just the math equation, which then gives us the P times Q to get us the pricing required to get there.
Well, I guess I'm going farther with, do we need a groin? Do we need, like, I think it's a bit, yeah, that's all I want.
That's all, and that's all
yeah.
in there too. That
That's
has to
all.
be the discussion to define what is our ideal.
How do we get there and keep it?
I think,
I agree.
so to kind of, to continue spinning off the ideal beach profile, I think we've been kind of roughly told maybe that's $20 million every 5 years. That's just kind of my guess at what that is. And I think that kind of frames it in, is that realistic? Can we get there? Or is that,
I'd
are
like
we
to
gonna
have something
spin our
to back,
wheels?
yeah, I'd like to have something to back that number up a little bit more than, yeah, I mean, I think you're probably in the neighborhood, but it would be helpful to just say survey versus where the ideal beach that gets defined, whether it's groins, not groins, or how much out, and how does that align up against the beach we have today? That's going to give us our.
That's why I was suggesting identifying several different people to talk to about it.
Yeah.
And then also think about what would be a value driver that would bring it down. for example, if we committed to 2 or 3 renourishments based on a discounted price, because we know if it was $17 million last time, it's going to be 20 this time, it might be 23 the next time.
Exactly. Yeah,
But I think
5
if we
years
can
out.
lock it in and give them some spread like they did in North Carolina, give them a 15-month window to do it, where they can pick their time.
Well, the one thing that came out of the DARE conversation was planning results in extreme discounts versus reactive. That's what I walked away from. Yeah.
And then once we have that number, we can, figure out how we get there.
Just one thing to keep in mind with Dare County, Dare County is, they're managing this at the county level, and they are planning on 5 to 7 projects at the same time lined up. I think that is a big difference from the position where we're at, where we can certainly partner with Sullivan's and identify, the plan or the maintenance program for Folly, but we're in a very different position because most of the beaches in our area that we could partner with are federally funded projects, and we are different. So I just think that's something to keep in mind when trying to compare our potential scenario for us to what Dare County has experienced. Even in Dare County with that plan and that consolidation of projects within a time frame, their project costs are between 10 and 20 million. 13, 17, and that's every 5 years, and they've just did their second cycle. So there's a little bit of history to look at. So I think they're not downplaying or minimizing, I think, the importance of planning and having a long plan to bid out and see how those economies can benefit the city. I just think we're unfortunately, in a different position.
One project will price out less than 7.
Correct.
Or different.
Yeah,
And
but
that- and I
but
mean-
they did make the comment that they saved $13 million by giving adjustments, having nothing to do with how it was being done, just we'll give you a window to do it, and
Yeah.
that saved them $13 million. And we could certainly take advantage of that.
Yeah.
And
Whatever the number is.
totally, all you have to do is look on a map, and Dare County is 100%, well, there's a teeny little part that's inland, but it's 100% mostly, especially when you look at population, oceanfront, and Charleston County is not. But I would like to try to have a conversation with Charleston County. And I've always, I think I've said it somewhat tongue in cheek, but the Mount Pleasant beach advocacy groups that love our beach so much, it would be interesting to see their perspective on this. I think, maybe we have some allies in places that we wouldn't have expected. I'm just, Charleston County is a very different county, for sure. But it is our county, and we are one of their 3 beaches, 3, whatever. So, I feel like it would be worth at least going to them hat in hand.
We just won Best Family Beach this year. So look
And
at
the county
that.
park,
Add that to
you're
the plan.
absolutely correct.
But unfortunately, the county park is in the area of the beach that's fine. And that's kind of maybe the pink elephant in the corner that Charleston County.
It is, but the parking's limited to the point that they come and they go all over the beach.
They do.
Because just to access it.
And it is all, one beach, and people do enjoy the whole beach. So, I do think, I would think that most people in Charleston County would like to see the whole Isle of Palms be a healthy beach. I think it's beneficial to everyone.
That goes back to the original comment we had, which was, once we figure out what it's gonna take to make the ideal beach, then we figure out the cost, and we figure out how much we can afford to do. When we approach them and we say, we need you to make up the deficit, we need you to contribute to it, I think we're in a better position than just asking them to contribute money.
Yeah, keep in mind, we've gotten one payment from them in 70 years.
Maybe because we didn't sell it right. I don't know. I'm just.
Can we ask?
Yeah.
Well, but it's
Don't kid yourself.
It's different nationally,
Yeah.
and I think people recognize, and Charleston's grown so much
Right.
over the last many years, and it's hard to get to the beach, and we need good, solid beaches to go to.
And I
I'm worried
think,
about the tourists not wanting to come when they see what the conditions are in part of the beaches right now.
and
That'll
I think
happen
some
slowly.
pictures too of what's gone on now to be able to say, without funding, this is what our beach looks like. And I think that may have some impact. Because we've had some serious moments this year, and we're having some right now. I said we're watching what happened, at 100, 200, 300 now, right at Breach Inlet, and those fences and gates and yards are falling down every day right now. We're not having high tide, not having extreme high tides. So, yeah, I think that may have some impact as we talk to people who are definitely, how can you not love our beach? But right now, it's not at its best, and we need some help.
And Charleston County is the primary beneficiary of those property taxes down there.
So the city receives 20% of the 2% of the county accommodation tax that's collected on the island. We call it, it's a Charleston County pass-through. They're not technically required to give that to the city. They've historically done it. So it's 20%, and that amounts to about between 500 and 700 over the past 5 years. That's probably not enough, right? I mean, that money is already encumbered, if you will, on operational costs and special projects that are tourism related. So I think that there's a conversation too about, do we need to allocate those monies differently? If there is we want to paint the story to the county. Look, we know we get this, but this is supporting all of these activities, the public restrooms, the parking, the facilities that the county residents enjoy, but we're still at a deficit. There's still a lot of need associated with the beach. But so I don't want I want people to understand we do get some money from the county, certainly not sufficient when we're looking at a beach plan that requires a lot more funding.
Is that pass-through money, where do we put that? Where's that go?
In our municipal accommodation tax fund.
Got it. So could that be something that we could earmark just specifically for or is that, I've
Some of it's,
It
Yeah,
takes,
take
we
away.
could, but it takes
Yeah.
away that money that's sort of already
But I mean,
accounted
I
for.
think those are perhaps some of the hard conversations we're going to have. It's like, how are we utilizing the funds that are open to us? And should we change the policy in regard to that? If I don't know what but this is my first budget cycle, so I'm trying to kind of figure it out. But if it makes sense to push 75% of that or all of it, into a fund specifically for beach renourishment or preservation, as we're allowed to do per the code and hang on to it by state law, maybe we need to start looking hard at that.
Would it help to, at the next meeting, I'd be interested, we've talked about
Excuse
so
me.
many.
Bless you.
Bless you. We've talked about so many potential funding sources, and it's sort of like a funnel. If we had 50 in the funnel, 10 might fall out at the bottom. But it would be helpful to have that list of the 50 potential, whether it's the county, whether it's, our neighbors across the bridge in a municipality, whether it's taxing, tax districts, whether it's parking fees, whether it's, looking at Wild Dunes opportunity to open up for additional federal funding. All of these are just possibilities that have been tossed out, but it would be helpful for me to have a kind of a list to run through, because every one of these probably need to be run to ground to find out if they're going to be a yes or a no. And I like that no is always, can always be the first answer towards yes.
So Scott,
Yeah, thanks.
Scott, are you referring to the similar list we provided to council at the last budget workshop that identified potential revenue increase opportunities?
Yeah, that kind of
And,
list for just beach renourishment, which
yeah,
might.
not so much revenue opportunities.
Well, it's a
Specific to beach renourishment.
It's a beach renourishment
Okay.
contribution. I mean, it wouldn't
I
be
think-
revenues to the city necessarily. It would be, the 65% of the, would never come to our coffers, but those are investment dollars that would end up on our beach. And, good point. It's not going to necessarily run through our budget. It might end up being a contribution from other sources too. Some may
Okay.
come to us directly, some may not. But, if we do a tax district, then that would come into our coffers, whereas a Army Corps contribution might not.
And eventually, just following up on Elizabeth and Desiree regarding the funds that we get from the county currently, it would be good, I can imagine what those funds could be used for. It'd be interesting to know what they are used for. Because, obviously, rescue, police. I mean, so then you may have an argument, well, look, this much of our is coming to that. We really can't spin any more off to the beach itself, and therefore we're coming to you to ask for a little bit more with great justification. I mean, clearly. So again, I think that might be helpful as we move forward into these funding conversations.
So it sounds like next week, I guess we can check and see if Stephen's available to start digging pretty hard on the beach profile aspect. I mean, is that,
Yeah, I mean, it seems like at least for,
critical.
it's pretty critical for
Foundation.
how we all
Yeah.
evaluate what's the next step. I mean, again, it'll define the budget. It
Yeah.
really will, and that is what then drives the rest of the.
and I think we have that from, the previous conversation. I think we just need to decide as a group, is what he put on the table, what we want to do? Do we want to start there and back off, or whatever?
I mean, and I'd like to
And-
see too, and I'm not sure that we did, maybe we did, I don't know, it's all a blur now, but did he say, okay, 450 is your ideal profile and 75% of your beach is already there? Or do we have any idea of what, like, if we were to
That is the
establish? a
question.
line- Yeah.
That's what we need.
Well, that graph, he had that graph
I feel like
that
he did, but it
showed-
was hard to
Yeah,
understand, really, for me.
kind of 21st to 41st is there, bits and pieces down are there, this section's not there.
So we're really dealing with
Couple
20% of
beaches.
our beach, perhaps.
Has he addressed what the, from the world of, a perfect position is 450, what's the least we could safely do, and what's more of a, moderate number, just so we know the range?
Didn't he say like
Because I'm wondering, once we
350?
get that, if the costs are gonna be that
Yeah.
much different.
And I think that would be similar.
Sweet spot.
That's similar to the course process. They really don't, and she said, we don't really look at, the width of the beach for recreation. Their formula is based on coastal resiliency. It's how much sand and dune do you need to protect the properties from a certain type of storm. And that may be the bare bones, or maybe, understanding that would be important too. What do we need to safely protect property?
Well, and it's so expensive to arm everybody to come do it again, that it might be that at 450, we're safer if we do, 375, maybe we're gonna have to do it every 3 years. And then to bring people back out, it costs more money than to do it every 5 years, and it's do 450.
Do bigger, fewer times, or,
It's the
Yeah.
deployment cost, it's the big.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the mobilization.
And that was the biggest thing I took away from the Army Corps' presentation, was the fact that they talked about building up the dune. It wasn't about the beach, it wasn't about the dry sand beach, it was about building up the dune, which is essentially a natural seawall. But it works in complement with the ocean versus trying to build a hardened structure. This is part of why the conversation is so key on that, as far as using nature to fight with nature versus putting some artificial structure which has not worthwhile ramifications. The physics on that are
But the dune
clear.
is the last resort. That's not a deterrent. You have to build the beach up. That's the key, so the water doesn't get to the dunes. Otherwise, it just blows through it, like we witnessed last year.
And this year.
Yeah, we had dune,
That's-
we had dune, we had no beach.
Yeah.
That's
And a big
the,
healthy dune.
Yes.
yeah,
They just put it back.
you can see it in so many different places
Yeah,
around
I
the
mean,
world. Or
I've
there are
seen it.
places that have short beaches as far as the width of the beach, where the ocean is, versus where the dune and how it develops, and
You see it every day.
the life.
I mean,
It's
yes, it can,
different.
it can get,
Can help.
a dune can get destroyed, but it is a very good, they've been working for millions of years, a lot longer than seawalls have.
It's kind of like a sandbag, it works for a while, and
Right, yeah.
stuff, but,
There is.
You need both, how's that? You need both, you need a
is.
perfect
And-
beach has really healthy dunes and beach. We've just lost a lot of beach, and therefore, the dune could not, like you said, the sandbags work until they can't, the dune couldn't work. And you see it just driving over from Sullivan's. The dune was huge there. We had so much land at Breach Inlet, and you just drive over every day, and there's less and less and less in the last 3 weeks. So Stephen had said at a previous meeting that his company does provide these I'd just be curious if he has the name of somebody who could could present to us on how that sort of process would work and give us some of, the basics, a time frame, how cost is determined, what the output would look like, so that we can, because I just think that's going to be the greatest thing, to be able to show and make the pitch to get help. Because we're a limited resource with a beautiful resource we want to protect.
So Cindy, are you, I think initially I was hearing you to say kind of a PR document.
No,
Once-
I'm talking a plan, like a plan,
Or are you
like
saying-
a 50-year, 30-year beach renourishment plan that says this island should look at this with this maintenance over this period of time, and you should, true expectations. And we talked about the economics as being part of it if they can provide it, and I think Stephen said they could because they do it regularly, which is just those paragraphs or two that we see in some of these reports that basically say a healthy beach results in property values that go up, it results in X and Y, and then we use this whole plan as here's what our cost is, here's what our goals are. I just think that's the sort of thing, if you're going to go to a county or a state or the federal government, you've got to really show we're
detail.
serious
Yeah.
and these are hard numbers. And it may have a range in it, and that's where I love the moderate or the perfect beach, but that also can come down to economics, where they say, well, moderate's great, but if you can just spend that extra $1 million a year, your property taxes are gonna go up $3 million. I don't know, I'm just, having read a lot of what Tim has read, it suggests that that's a good way to.
Well, it tells a story, right?
And
It tells
also,
a
it's easy to
story.
share, like, it'll be on our website, people can look at it, they can understand it. I'm looking to buy property in Wild Dunes or on the main, and I can look at this and say, oh, this looks like this community has their act together in, these changing times.
Well, when the last renourishment, the south end was supposed to get 600,000 cubic yards of sand. That would have provided, according to the document, 75 feet of dry sand at high tide. So things have changed since 2018. So if they would have had that 600,000 cubic yards of sand, might not be in the same boat we're in now. So,
Well, and that's the hope, is in the future, we won't end up here, but we'll do it in a way we can fiscally and plan for it and save money by doing it as a plan. And I'm sorry that I've been a broken record.
Yeah, so
Okay, but that
wrap.
broken
Yeah.
record's leaving.
Yeah.
And
So
I
let-
want to apologize. I'm going to miss a number of meetings. I have to leave town for a few weeks.
So let's see if we can get Mr. Trainum next week, further define the beach profile, further define what kind of services his company can offer to us. Is that fair?
Yeah, maybe go through that list of the funding if we have any time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
You also sent out your list of 6 was great, I just didn't get a chance to write them all down.
It's
It
in the
was in the
packet.
package.
Oh, it's in the packet,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, it's next to the second page after
Okay,
the
sorry,
agenda.
my
Yep.
mistake.
No, it's all right. 10:02, off record. Thank you all.
Thank you.
I've got a question for you, counsel.
Uh-oh, that hurts.